climbing trees, trying to hunt squirrels, trying to enter a nest to find rodents. I saw it trying to catch a squirrel as well. The nest was really high up in the canopy, Brittle Stars. Tiger prawns are super fascinating. It looks like a worm. Hermit crab that probably sees this and thinks it's prey. I've actually seen the snake only once in my life till now. The most fascinating animals in the world. So they actually run a little bit on the water when they start flying. Fish that spend 90% of their life on land, trees that are above water, so that jackals and other animals can actually not prey on their nest eggs. Literally millions of animals that I find fascinating. Talking about five of them just is not enough because there always going to be more animals that I want to talk about. So, like the last two videos, I've randomly picked five animals that I want to talk about in today's podcast. There are millions that I find fascinating, but in today's podcast, I've randomly picked five animals that I'm going to talk about. So, the first animal that I'm going to talk about that I find super fascinating are the Indian rat snakes. So, I've literally gone for thousands of trails and I've seen Indian rat snakes so many times. And what's super fascinating is I've always seen them in such different habitats. I've seen Indian rat snakes swimming in ponds. I've seen Indian rat snakes climbing trees, trying to hunt squirrels, trying to enter a nest. I have literally seen Indian rat snakes slithering on the forest floor and in such different habitats, and that's why I find them super fascinating, you guys. The fact that a lot of the times snakes have a particular habitat type, like certain snakes are arboreal, certain snakes are fossorial, certain snakes are terrestrial. Indian rat snakes are literally such fascinating snakes because they can climb trees if they want to eat a bird's egg that's there in a nest high up in the canopy of a tree. They can literally go down in the termite mounds or in holes in the ground that are made by rats to find rodents. They can even swim in water and eat frogs. They have one of the most diverse habitats and diets, and that's literally why I find them so fascinating. They have also been known to eat other snakes as well. So not only do they eat rodents, they eat birds, they eat squirrels, they literally eat frogs, they eat such a diverse diet, and even other snakes and other reptiles. So I find Indian rat snakes to be super fascinating, and a lot of times I've actually seen them in different morphs as well. And I have seen them in dark gray morphs, and I've seen them in light gray morphs. I've also seen them like sometimes they'll be a little bit on the yellowish side. They're literally such beautiful snakes, you guys, and they're one of the most beautiful snakes. One of the most fascinating sightings I actually saw was once I had gone for a trail a couple of months ago, and I saw this really beautiful Indian rat snake that was crossing the trail path really far away, and it was super calm, and it was actually trying to go inside the holes and probably smell if there's any prey nearby. And after smelling the holes, it actually started climbing the tree, and that was the first time I actually saw um, this the Indian rat snake climbing a tree, and it started climbing the tree, and it was such an amazing climber, such an agile climber, literally like an arboreal snake. It climbed the tree, and after it reached the top of the tree, it was literally chasing a squirrel, and the squirrel started to make really loud alarm calls because the squirrel obviously got to know that there's an Indian rat snake that's climbing, that's slithering up the tree trying to catch it. But the squirrel actually could not go right on top of the branches because on top there were a lot of black kites that were circling as well. So it was super fascinating to see a squirrel trying to evade both these predators, the black kites from above that might pick it up, or the Indian rat snake that might slither along the branches and eat it. So it was super fascinating to see the squirrel actually making alarm calls, and the Indian rat snake, I saw it trying to catch a squirrel as well. It was one of the most amazing sights. And after that, I think two more times I have seen Indian rat snakes climbing trees. One of them was actually when it was trying to enter the nest of a bird, and the nest was really high up in the canopy, so I couldn't actually see whether there were eggs or anything. But from down, when I saw the Indian rat snake was actually going towards the nest, so that was a super fascinating sight. So Indian rat snakes are definitely the one of the most fascinating animals. And the next fascinating animal that I'm going to talk about are brittle stars. So I had actually gone exploring the tide pools a couple of months back. I've gone exploring tide pools a lot of times, but this time when I went exploring the tide pools, I actually saw a really beautiful brittle star. And these are really beautiful marine creatures that are related to starfish. And unlike starfish that move really slowly across the ocean floor, brittle star actually move with a rowing like motion where their arms actually push the ground and the water, and they move like that, and they're actually quite fast on the ocean floor. and they're actually super sensitive to light, and that's why when the temperature is really high and when it's sunny, they mostly in the intertidal zones they will be under rocks and all, and also they stay under rocks not only to stay away from the light because they're really sensitive to light. That's actually a way to stay away from the predators as well, like the herons and egrets that actually feed on them. So brittle stars are super fascinating. I've seen them a couple of times when I was exploring tide pools, but they're literally one of the most beautiful animals ever. And apart from being very sensitive to light, brittle stars, if there's a predator like an egret or heron that it doesn't end up evading, and if the egret actually grabs one of its arms, it can actually let go of that arm and regrow that arm. So just like how starfish can. And I find brittle stars to be super fascinating, that's why. And they're basically the scavengers of the tide pools. They don't hunt, actually they do hunt for tiny creatures sometimes, tiny crustaceans and stuff, but most of the time they are scavengers and they eat the detritus like the plankton and all the other dead waste and matter, organic matter that seeps by in the water or that is on the rock. They have such mucus filled arms that just like sweep off all that plankton and they just feed on that. So they're super amazing scavengers of the marine tide pools. And talking about the tide pools, I'll get back to the five fascinating animals in the minute. I've already said two. I'm going to talk about the other three in a minute. But before I get to that, I want to talk about a little bit about exploring the tide pools. I'm going to talk about a full podcast where I talk only about exploring tide pools, but now I'm just going to touch on it a little bit. When I went exploring a couple of tide pools a few months ago, I actually saw a goby fish, which are these really beautiful fish. They're actually venomous, but they can be found in tidal pools, and they can be found alongside other animals in the tide pools as well. And one of the other animals that I saw was a tiger prawn in another tide pool. And tiger prawns are super fascinating, as you guys must have already seen tiger prawns in the past, but this was the first time I saw a tiger prawn literally alive in a tide pool eating something. It was super fascinating. And then I actually saw two more tiger prawns as well. It was super fascinating, you guys, to see tiger prawns in the wild like this in tide pools. And I also saw a couple of plovers. They're really small birds. And I saw a couple of sandpipers and stilts along the coast trying to catch the tiny goby fish and other fish. I also saw a western reef heron as well. That was super beautiful. And I also saw a couple of snails. And these are actually snails that have a stinger that they have a probe that actually comes out that basically looks like a worm. So if there's any small crustacean like the hermit crab that probably sees this and thinks it's prey like a worm, it'll go to eat that worm, which is not actually a worm. It's the probe of the snail, and the snail actually then preys on the hermit crab as well. And talking about hermit crabs, I saw so many hermit crabs, you guys. Literally so many hermit crabs, and I saw a couple of hermit crabs near the snail as well. And the snail literally was so fascinating in the way it hunts. It actually submerges itself a little bit below the sand, so only its probe is visible above the sand. So it literally looks like a worm that's there. So a lot of the times the crustaceans like the hermit crabs feed on them. And I saw a lot of hermit crabs fighting. And what I realized is that they actually fight for shells as they outgrow their shells. They can't live in that shell anymore because the shell is too small for them. So they actually fight other hermit crabs for their shell. And a lot of times the sea snails that die, they can actually use their shells as their own as well if they outgrow their shells. So hermit crabs are super fascinating, and yeah, I can't wait to do a podcast episode where I talk about tide pools in great detail with you guys. Okay, so now the third animal I'm going to talk about that I find super fascinating are the Gunther's racer. And these snakes are one of the most beautiful snakes I've ever seen. I've actually seen the snake only once in my life till now, and it was when I went for a mountain trail, and it was actually slithering across the mountain rocks, and it was one of the most beautiful snakes I've ever seen. And when I actually read up about it later, they're one of the most rarely seen snakes, and the terrestrial snakes that a lot of the times live in arid regions and semi-arid regions, and especially on mountains as well. And these snakes have a primary diet of small lizards like skinks, and they have also been seen sometimes to eat mice as well. I find them super fascinating because when I went for this morning trail, I actually saw a really beautiful Gunther's racer slithering across the mountain, as I mentioned before. And it was one of the most beautiful snakes I'd ever seen, and it was climbing the mountain rocks so well. Although it's not an arboreal snake, it wasn't, they don't climb trees, but it was just climbing the rocks so well, and it was so perfectly suited for that terrain, and it was really well camouflaged against that terrain as well. So what a beautiful snake that I saw. Fourth animal that I'm going to be talking to you guys about is the Komodo Dragon. These animals are one of the most fascinating creatures ever. They're the largest lizard species on earth and they can get up to 4 to even 8 feet. I have seen a few Komodo dragons in zoos that I've gone to in the past, and they're one of the most unique animals ever. They're terrestrial reptiles, and they basically have a really, really unique hunting mechanism where they don't actually constrict their prey. They basically bite their prey, which is usually really large mammals like deer and wild boar. And what they basically do is that they will bite these animals, and then they just follow the animal really slowly. They don't immediately try to eat it, they basically follow it for a while, and the animal basically starts dying, and then they eat the animal. And basically the Komodo dragons are endemic to certain islands, and they're super super fascinating animals because not only do they have such large prey like deer and wild boar and other small mammals, but basically for a lot of time it was actually believed that they don't have venom, and that their mouth has such so much bad bacteria that when they bite their prey actually starts dying off because of the bad bacteria, and that's how they eat their prey after. But recently I read up about how I think now it's believed that they actually do have venom, and that is why the prey actually gets subdued in a couple of hours or in a few days, and they can actually eat their prey. So Komodo dragons are one of the most fascinating animals ever, and I've seen them a couple of times in zoos, as I mentioned, and they're literally super super huge. I've seen a few individuals that were 8 feet long, and they're literally so huge, you guys. And yeah, they're one of the most fascinating animals in the world. Okay, so the fifth animal that I find super fascinating that I'm going to be talking about are flamingos. Flamingos are one of the most beautiful birds, and I have seen greater flamingos, lesser flamingos, and Caribbean flamingos in the wild. And they basically get their pink color from the shrimp that they eat that contain the pigment carotenoid, which gives flamingos their pink color in turn. And flamingos actually live in flocks of thousands and sometimes hundreds of thousands. And what's super fascinating is how they start flying. So they actually run a little bit on the water, and I've seen this so many times. But they literally run a little bit on the water when they start flying, and even when they're landing on the water, they run a little bit on the surface of the water. As I mentioned, they're actually born grey, black in color, and the more shrimp they eat, they get pinker. Greater flamingos are lesser pink, whereas lesser flamingos are highly pink in color. And I literally love flamingos. I have seen flamingos so many times during boat rides, and even when I have gone to explore the mangroves, I've seen a lot of different flamingos, and they're one of the most beautiful birds ever. And they actually eat these fish called mudskippers as well. Flamingos also have this really unique standing method where they stand on one leg, and they actually do that for two reasons. They do that for thermoregulation. By tucking one leg, they can actually reduce the surface area that's exposed to the sunlight, and that's how they thermoregulate. Because they're mostly diurnal birds, right? So because they're feeding during the day, they have a lot of sun exposure. So tucking one leg into the other actually helps in thermoregulation. And another reason is that they want to conserve their energy. Since they're feeding for hours, they like to conserve their energy, and they actually have a special muscle and joint system where when the leg is actually tucked like that, there's no muscle exertion, so they can stay like that for hours and continue feeding on the shrimp and the algae below. So I literally find flamingos super super fascinating. Now talking about mudskippers. Mudskippers are actually fish that I've seen flamingos eat a lot of times, and mudskippers are one of the most beautiful fish ever. They're fish that spend 90% of their life on land and not in water. And what they actually do is they make burrows near the water where there's a lot of soft soil, and they're mostly found in habitats where the land and water meet, where there's a lot of brackish water near mangroves. And flamingos love eating mudskippers and other wading birds like egrets, herons, and all these other birds love walking on the mangrove coast and shores and searching for mudskippers. And mudskippers actually, because they spend 90% of their time on land, they can actually move through the mangrove mud flats by moving their pectoral fins. And in case there's a predator like an egret or heron that's trying to eat it, they have a really muscular tail that can propel them like 2 feet forward when they move it, so they can like evade the egret or heron and move to safety. And I've seen a couple of mudskippers, and I've seen flamingos feasting on mudskippers. So mudskippers are definitely one of the most fascinating animals that I've ever seen. And now that I'm talking about mangroves and mudskippers and flamingos, let me tell you guys a little bit more about my experience and what I've seen in mangroves. A few times when I went to these mangroves, I actually saw a lot of black-headed ibis, and these are one of the most beautiful birds ever. They actually make nests a lot of times in trees that are above water, so that jackals and other animals can actually not prey on their nest eggs or their young birds. And these are one of the most beautiful birds ever.